to do. So first, what is a ring mold? Here are two I've made as kind of these demo pieces in the past. And you can see they've got a ring or a hole in the center, which ends up building kind of a built-in foot. It's got a slope, which is this part here, which ends up being the slope or the underside of the pot. And then it's got kind of a width and of course a general shape that will determine kind of the size of the piece. I like to think of the ring mold as that support clay that in when you're like throwing, it's that clay that you would trim away. But in this case, here's a cross section. The ring mold ends up being that support clay, but you can reuse that same kind of support over and over and over. So in that way, it's kind of like a volume that you're making or a scaffolding. So here, this little area there is that area that could be that transition from the underside to the table or the foot. It's not necessary. You can totally eliminate that. You just then have to build this flatter towards the table. So then this slope becomes that slope on the pot. So you'll notice in both these, this both has that same base shape. But now you can see how the same base shape can start making bowls or cups or jars or creamers or kind of endless possibilities within this. So when you're starting to think about a ring mold, you start with, of course, how much clay you're going to begin with. And I was thinking about what's a good starting point, and how about we all make soap dishes? Because that's a big part of our life right now, right? So a soap dish, again, I've got a bar soap idea, and that's going to be the size I want to think about. So you'll see I start with just kind of making a really thick coil by squeezing the clay in a rounded kind of way. The thickness of this coil is going to determine the height of the ring. Of course, the length of the coil is going to determine how big a round you can make it. So you can totally play within that. The bigger the coil, the taller the ring. So then it would be the higher kind of that volume is. Versus the smaller the ring, though you don't want to make it too small because then you have to deal with this being super fragile or the potential of this warping in the kiln. So here, I'm going to use my hands and I kind of windshield wiper them out. I'm using not very much pressure. The pressure is really just to help the clay roll. And then it's the table that kind of then is leaving, evening everything out. I'm trying to keep it from getting real lumpy, get that flat tire kind of thing. So I'll keep just adjusting and changing my location of my hands. So I've been thinking about a soap dish. And it doesn't have to be very deep. So I'm going to make it on a kind of a smaller coil. And then I think most soaps tend to be kind of a soft square. So I'm going to make it a soft square shape. All right. There we have a nice little kind of uniform coil. This will get bisque, so it will shrink at least 6%. So I want to make it a little larger than I want. So I have to think of that with the length of this coil. Now, I'm guessing most people don't have a banding wheel. So here's your secret ingredient. This is a little piece of newspaper. So I have to find, I think this will be right size. The other thing is once I start shaping this, I don't want to pick it up. So I'm going to put something underneath it so I can move that and not have to pick this up. So I have my bat, I have my newspaper, I've shaped this coil to be on that newspaper, be all on it so you can easily move it around. It's not going to stick to the table. Now that it's on this flat surface, in this, if you don't have a bat, you can totally use a board, drywall, hardy board, which is great for getting at the hardware store. You know, anything that's kind of okay that you're getting clay on, because the newspaper will help, but you're still going to kind of get it messy. But the idea is now I'm going to build this on here, and then I put it right on that newspaper. So definitely the newspaper is key. Why is it key? Because this is going to want to stick, and the newspaper is going to keep it from sticking, but it will also allow me to kind of move it around really easily, like as if it was on a banding wheel. So I'm trying to take advantage of this whole, I pre-cut this newspaper, which wasn't the best idea. Some of the tools you might need for this, you've got, I've been using this in the studio. I brought it home, but you could snatch a kitchen knife, but then it's going to be a clay tool from then on. An X-Acto, you could take if you have that in your office, or you might already have one for your clay tools. A metal rib. If you don't have the metal rib, you can start cutting up old hotel key cards, or maybe an old AAA membership or a gift card. You're going to want a rib. And then this is something I made, and you can totally make it one. You'll need sewing needles and Fimo, or the polymer clay that you can just bake in the oven. So when it's soft, I mix bright colors, so I'm sure to find it when I am working in the studio. And then I stick the sewing needles in and then bake it in the oven. So this is totally something you can do at home. So here you can see this is kind of overlapped and on that newspaper. And then I'm going to cut it diagonal and through both layers. You can see that. So by cutting them together, now when I remove these chunks, you make sure to keep them wrapped so they don't dry out. These have a huge amount of surface area at that connection, because I want that connection to be really good. And now that, I'm not going to just stick it together, I'm going to score it and add a little bit of water. I've got my scoring tool. So you can see scored. And then the water, hand building, you don't need much, so I'm just getting a little bit of water there and there. And then I'm going to connect those 2 points. So here you can see, the oval shape. Oop. And how easily it slips around on the newspaper. And then I'm going to work really hard to not flex the clay, because that clay has that memory. And if I flex it at this point, it's more likely to warp in the kiln. But if I want to change it, remember I was thinking about that bar of soap, so I can start changing this shape into that soft square. One of the great things about hand building is you don't have to make it round. You can do it any shape, and you kind of have the ability too to make it asymmetrical if you want. But I recommend for the first one just keep it simple, because I think there's something to just learning with the, it's kind of like learning to center, and then you can learn how to manipulate that. So here I've kind of made it that soft rectangle. And now here, my thumb is going to be the main one working. My fingers are kind of the backup, and they're following along. I am on the clock here. I'm at about 1 o'clock, so I can look at my thumb, and then it's going to press down towards the table. So I'm using that table as support, and then I can overlap. And now I'm starting to press and compress that clay, but also create that angle. See how I'm rotating the dish with that newspaper underneath it? So this hand is out here doing a job of kind of guiding and turning it, while this hand on the thumb is definitely the one that's doing the main job of shaping that slope. Now you're starting to see, I don't worry about this interior space yet, and this is still quite soft. So this is kind of a double process. This first part is shaping it when it's really soft. Then when it's leather hard, it's going to be about refining it. So I don't worry about this interior shape. I don't even worry about this top edge yet. What I want to do is make sure to kind of smooth out any of the big bumps that are going to be harder to smooth out later on. This is where those ribs come in handy. So I like the metal rib. It's kind of got a built-in kind of angle to it. Can you see that? So I'm using this angle to kind of smooth out those lumps and bumps. And I kind of cross-hatch this to compress and smooth out. So if you just go one way, it might create a bump. Then you might want to go the other way to kind of smooth out that same spot. So when you're happy with how that slope is for now, at this point I'm going to just let it kind of leather hard, rest, get a little stiffer,